Well, on today's show, we're throwing it way back to the golden era of worship music. We're talking about those songs that shaped a generation. We're so excited to have Chad Gentry with us. He's behind 90s Worship Night. Chad, along with his wife Karen, has created an incredible movement that celebrates the powerful worship anthems of the 90s through live events, a docuseries, a podcast, and even a record label. Whether you grew up singing Shout to the Lord, or Lord, I lifted your name on high, this movement is more than just nostalgia. It's about reconnecting with the heart of worship and passing these songs onto a brand new generation. Chad, thank you so much, man, for chatting with us.
Oh, it is my pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for the invite, and excited to tell you about what all we're doing over 90s Worship Night.
Yeah, so let's get into the conversation here. What is 90s Worship Night? You know, we've been seeing videos come across our feed, and I know we've messaged back and forth a few times, but go ahead and tell our viewers and our listeners about what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll first start off by saying this. This is not a passion project. This was not a, career strategy. 90s Worship Night literally started just in the aftermath of the passing of a dear friend. And it was really a divine call. I don't know how better to describe it than that. And we started, this whole mission in the beginning of 2021. Now, at that time, I had no idea that the scope of what 90s Worship Night would become would be where it is at. I may have ran for the hills had I known that back then, because it's definitely grown. And it's become very ambitious with what we're really trying to do. Just as far as trying to describe it, it's pretty well different segments that we're really hitting as far as our product, or whatever you want to call it. I kind of call the tip of the spear of what we're doing is a 10-part docuseries that's in post-production. The first episode, though, I'm excited to announce, is releasing on April 4th here in the year of 2025. And it has been a long time coming, 4 years, from conception to, where we're at now. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping we'll get episode 2 out later this year, but it might be a slow roll, as far as, each episode releasing. But I promise, for everyone who's been waiting on it, it will be worth the wait. Because, that's really, again, like I said, kind of the center of, what our mission has been with 90s Worship Night is this docuseries. But in the overflow of that, we started a record label in partnership with Integrity Music, and we call NWN Records. And really the purpose of it is to just kind of have a vehicle to release live albums, which I'll get into that in a second with our live events. And, that we can go in the studio and do studio compilation albums with different features, but all songs, that are covers of what I kind of collectively call the 90s worship catalog, which would be those evergreen songs, just, like you mentioned with Shout to the Lord, Breathe, I Could Sing of Your Love Forever, those types of songs. So we're, in the midst of, putting out several singles this year. The third part of what we do are our live events, which is arguably maybe my favorite part about it, just because we get to, go out, be amongst, like-minded Christians who were impacted, by the 90s decade as much as, we here at 90s Worship Night have been, and, do nights of worship, whether they just be with a local church, utilizing the local talent, or, if we're doing an event where we bring in one of the legacy artists or several of them. For instance, we did a live event last August at Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and that's turning into what's going to be a live album coming out into spring, early summer this year, called Live from D.C., but we had Jeff Dio and Charlie Hall, Brenton Brown, and then Lisa Nicole, formerly of Out of Eden, who were part of that event. It was a great time. and definitely a really nice variation to all the other live events, that we do. And we've got some other ideas for some partnerships that we want to do, with live events. But the goal is really, for the docuseries, the record label, and the live events to kind of, feed off of each other, so to speak. And definitely, and we've done some podcasting. I guess that would be the other part. We have a 90s worship podcast in partnership with Praise Charts. We're just kind of getting into what we call season 2 with that. And hopefully as we go forward, we'll be able to do some, more highly produced podcasts and get into some different topics. But for now, that's, what we've been up to. And, we've kind of been in soft launch for the past year, waiting for this release date. Now that we have it firmly set for April 4th, we're excited to hard launch and, take this whole movement up to the next level.
So, Chad, the docuseries, what can we expect for the first episode?
Yeah, the first episode, I would describe as a microcosm of what the whole series will be. In that, we're covering the events that happened down in Pensacola, Florida, popularly known as, the Brownsville Revival or the Pensacola Outpouring, that took place between 1995 and the year 2000. And definitely that narrative that we're telling centers around the music ministry of Lyndall Cooley, who was the worship leader down at Brownsville for the revival. And it was really interesting because, we're talking about an age pre-internet, right? Definitely pre-social media, pre-YouTube. And Brownsville and what happened at that revival almost kind of served the purpose of almost like a YouTube, in that all these different songs that were kind of, popular in different hubs, at the time. Lyndall did a great job of kind of figuring out about those songs, bringing them into Brownsville, leading them at the revival. And then you had people literally from all over the world coming to Pensacola, Florida to be a part of the revival. They're hearing these songs, they're buying the CDs and then they're taking them to the four corners of the earth. So it really almost served kind of like a YouTube, in that, they were popularizing worship songs and different worship movements that really the mass majority of Christians didn't even know existed, before Brownsville. The best example, I can say this for myself, I didn't know anything about the Vineyard movement before Brownsville happened. And, what Brownsville meant to the proliferation of Vineyard worship, Vineyard music, it was really a game changer, for them. And so many of the 90s era Vineyard songs kind of became almost like the soundtrack of the revival.
Right.
It's a really, really fascinating story. So in this episode, it's about 40 minutes long, which we're hoping that all the episodes are about that long. That's kind of the formula that we've created, for the docuseries. But we'll get into, some origin story, beginning of the revival. We'll definitely touch on, some key song stories and, album creation stories. And then what's really important to us is we want the end of each episode to kind of, the last sequence, to focus on legacy. Like, what's the takeaway from what happened back in the 90s in that, particular movement. So I think that, anyone who, attended the Brownsville Revival or was impacted by it, it is a must watch. I promise you that. I've already had so many people, just beating down the door wanting to watch it, of those who, attended the revival back then. But I also think that for someone who's not familiar with the subject matter, whether they just, weren't in church at that time or didn't attend, or if they weren't even born yet, I still think that there'll be a lot, to learn and to take away from that episode, even for those parts of the viewership as well.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to the music, like making the albums, how do you guys select who you want to perform in those, like with the artist?
Well, we kind of let the Holy Spirit curate the album. And I'm not saying that, tongue in cheek or be facetious or whatever. That's really the truth, and that's been, given that, doing this was not my idea, any of this, it really was a divine moment that I had at the end of 2020, during a really, really difficult time, as I said. I mean, not only with a dear friend of decades past, but, we're right in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
It just seemed like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. So that was surprising. And then we get to the top of 2021. I'm like, well, Lord, here I am. Send me, just, tell me what to do. So, I mean, really our approach to everything has been that, it's try to take any preconceptions and throw them out the window. So it's like every day, every week, let's be led by the Spirit for what needs to happen. And I mean, really, the debut studio album, Break Through the Stars, when we knew that we needed to do that, I don't even think I even had a wish list of artists, to do features. It was really just a lot of prayer, and then natural conversations that happen. And with that, it's like you kind of have to have an idea for a song, not just an artist too. So there are those conversations. I mean, some folks were approached with, hey, we really want this song to be covered. Would you be willing to sing it? Or, hey, let me give you a list of songs and you can choose from it. Or in a few cases, it was, hey, I like this song, but I want to, add something to it to make it a derivative. We kind of had all the above. We had medley in there. It's really from a publishing standpoint, every possible scenario you could think of, we covered in the in the first album. But really proud of what we accomplished with that. Like I said, because it really was just a Holy Spirit led endeavor. And our goal for our follow-up studio compilation, which hopefully that'll be released sometime next year. Planning to do it the exact same way, and currently saying a lot of prayers on that as far as, who needs to be involved, and, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Now, you guys, since it's 90s, you guys going to have everyone dress up in 90s outfits, fruit, what is it? Fruit by the foot, and like all the 90s foods, and come on, man.
Well, it's funny, when we've done some of the church events, some of the churches have definitely taken it to that level of serious. Even that they, you'll see pastors buy like button up geometric shape, graphic laced, shirts that they got off of Amazon, and stuff like that. So that's a lot of fun to see.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, we definitely could, get to that level of nostalgia if if a church wants to do that in hosting an event. I feel like, graphics wise, we've done a pretty good job of, doing a throwback, and, and that's always a fine line to walk, because you're always going to have a certain portion of, your audience or your partners who want more of a modern, kind of feel to things. So we're, trying to walk that tightrope between, being modern, but also honoring, the source material and the aesthetic of the day.
Now, who were some of your favorite artists from the 90s that you grew up listening to?
Yeah, well, speaking of the Brownsville Revival, I was heavily impacted, by that movement, primarily because, I was involved with an Assembly of God church, part of the Assembly of God denomination, which at that time, Brownsville, still is, but, they were part of the Assembly of God organization. So any AG, church in the nation had Brownsville on their radar, as far as what was going on. Our church being no different. So we were early adopters of, a lot of the songs that were being led down in Brownsville. So that was incredibly impactful. And like I said, through Brownsville, I learned about vineyards. So, I started, learning about Brian Dirksen, Andy Park, and David Roos, and, my good friend now, Scott Underwood, Rita Springer. There were just, so many fantastic worship leaders and songwriters in the Vineyard movement. So that definitely was part of it. Another huge influence was, speaking of my dear friend of the past, that was the late Danny Chambers, who, was a pastor in Nashville for several years, but before that was a key figure in, 80s and 90s worship ministry. more specifically even with the youth.
Right.
He had such an impact out in Oklahoma City, and some of the youth camps and such that were going on there at the time, and he's had a huge impact on me. It was really through him and some of those others that I mentioned that I kind of learned what a worship leader was and kind of how you should approach worship ministry. So I was very lucky in that regard, because that's one of the big talking points that we'll get into throughout the series is there definitely was a shift between ministry and then worship turning commercial.
Right.
And that really started, I mean, technically it's a very fascinating topic, but when Sonic Flood came out in 1999, that was really the start of the commercial era of worship music, which we find ourselves still in. I mean, even more so today than it was back then.
Yeah. Michael W. and everybody did worship albums.
Yeah, well, you had that part. I mean, Rebecca St. James. I mean, that's one of the fascinating trivia questions was the song "Breathe" that Marie Barnett wrote. She was part of the Vineyard movement, songwriter and worship leader. That was definitely one of the biggest worship songs that came out of the '90s. But Rebecca St. James and Michael W. Smith recorded a cover of that, released it at one point in time. Both versions were 1 and 2 on the charts. But you never see that anywhere. I don't know if that's ever happened anywhere else. But that just tells you once worship music exploded, it really exploded from a commercial aspect for sure. And then that kind of paved the way for the Passion movement, and then things really shifted in 2004. When Chris Tomlin released the Arriving album, and that's kind of when radio fully started to embrace worship. And today, that's at least half of the format now, which is
at least
mind blowing. I wouldn't have thought that would ever happen back in the 90s. So a lot has shifted. But I think there's just a lot to learn from what was worship music, back pre-commercial era. What exactly is worship ministry? How's that different than entertainment? How's that different than commercial aspirations? It's some very fascinating narratives that we'll get to discuss and shine a light on, so to speak, throughout the process.
Well, Chad, I thought it would be fun to play a little game with you. I have some 90s CCM questions to ask you.
Geesh, okay.
And
hopefully I don't make 90s. An idiot of myself.
So they're pretty easy, I would think.
Okay.
Some of them are maybe a little difficult, but the first question is, what female artists known for hits like Baby Baby crossed the mainstream or into mainstream pop success in the early 90s?
Yeah, well, I mean, that would be specifically Amy Grant. Funny enough, with that, my friend Keith Thomas, who is a legendary music producer, he, wrote and produced that track with Amy. And so I've heard the whole backstory of how that whole thing happened. It's a very, very fascinating story. But man, what a hit. I told Keith a couple of years ago when we were talking about, because that was at the time when Tori Kelly, I don't know if you remember, she did a cover of that, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I'd have to look it up. But that made me go back and listen to Keith's original version. And I'm like, man, Keith still beat him. And that was 35 years ago, and that's just such a legendary song and track.
For sure.
So I could talk about that for 5 minutes. So we'll go on to your next. Yeah, that's hopefully I can just answer these as we go on. I won't, I don't know how much backstory I'll know about the rest of these, but there you go.
Which band's 1990 album Beyond Belief became a cornerstone of Christian rock and won a Dove Award for Rock Album of the Year?
1990? Oh, geez.
They're still around.
Gosh. Well, I'm not sure if I know that one or not. That was I really kind of I'll say anything that happened pre 95, 96 is a question mark.
The answer rhymes with Metra.
Okay, Petra. Okay. Well, I figured, definitely they would be a usual suspect of guesses on that.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating story on that, because an individual who was from our church was in one of the later iterations of that band. But they, talking about worship albums, they put out a worship album called Petra Praise, later in the 90s that
They
definitely
did
had an
Lord, I Lift Your Name on
influence.
High too, on that one, I
Yeah,
think.
they did that. They did, funny enough, they did a version of Ancient of Days, which, that's a big 90s worship night song. My wife leads it, and, we'll be talking about that a lot in the Ron Canoli episode. But Petra, there you go. Good
Ron
old Petra.
Canoli. Which group, famous for their harmonies, released the hit song Love Song for a Savior in 1995?
Oh, geez. I should know this one as well. Definitely heard the song. Was it one of the vocal groups at the time, or was it more of a band?
It's a band, during the period of what's the band's name? Well, Kurt Cobain. My brain's what's the name of Kurt Cobain?
Nirvana. Yeah,
Nirvana. Yeah.
That
It was during that era. This Christian band came out and it was huge.
Geez, you may have to give me a hint on this one as well.
Jars of Clay.
It was Jars of Clay. Okay, so would that come out? Was that
Came out in
after
95.
Flood?
It was on the same album as Flood.
Same album as Flood.
Yeah, it was their debut album.
Okay. Yeah, I like Jars of Clay. Okay, they were not, one of my kind of top favorite. I kind of really got into the Christian, like real rock kind of scene at that time, which I could name a bunch of those bands. But definitely a good group. Dan Hasseltine, cool singer. And I actually saw them. They put out a hymns album later, like at the end of the 90s, and I got to go see them on that tour and really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So.
Last question. What popular sibling trio released their debut album, Talk About It, in 92? R&B, hip-hop, and gospel.
Was that the...
Give you a clue. She sings on one of your tracks.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was out of... I couldn't remember what the name of their debut album was.
Yeah.
And, it's so amazing. And they were... such an interesting thing. They were the flagship artist on Goatee Records. That was the first album. Such a fascinating story. And we'll kind of get into with the Jeff Dio episode and talking about the origin story of Sonic Flood. We'll get to talk about Goatee Records and get a little bit of the history of them and talk about Out of Eden. So and they did soon after that, they released Lovely Day, that cover, and they're actually, they just did a remake of that just came out, and they're getting ready to put out an EP, kind of a reunion EP. So for any listeners out there, check out Out of Eden's project when it comes out.
Yeah.
So
that'd be good. So with our first time guests, our listeners and viewers like to do this, call it favorite things. And so I'm going to give you a word and you just give me your favorite thing in that category. Sound good?
Sounds good.
First one, what is your favorite food?
I'll have to go with pizza. My wife likes pizza too, but not probably as much as I do. So we don't eat it as much as I probably would like for us to, but maybe like every couple of weeks I'll twist her arm to either go out or we'll get something delivered. So.
My wife likes pizza and Mexican, and then now she's on like a Cuban food phase, and so we eat that a lot.
Yeah, it's like my wife likes Asian, like I like pizza.
Yeah.
So we usually are. Usually I'm the one that like I enjoy Asian food, but not to the extent she does. So she could probably go about 3 times a week doing that. And I'm like, I could go about once a week on that.
Right.
So I definitely feel your pain for sure.
Okay, this is a two-parter since we're talking 90s. What is your favorite movie and favorite 90s movie?
Favorite movie? Well, I can tell you 90s movie because it actually makes this easier because we can. It could arguably be my favorite, but Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about that movie. That was just such.
Have you eaten at Bubba Gump's before?
No, I have not. Definitely have seen them. Different touristy areas that they have one. But it's well, the cool part about that was there's such a tie to the state of Alabama, and with University of Alabama. Half of my family's from Alabama, so that makes it a little bit more special. Just that whole story. But wonderful movie. Anyone who's watching this that has not seen that, you are missing out. I don't care how old you are. It is a timeless movie. 100 years from now will be just as relevant it is now.
At the restaurant, they have you can stop your server with these little flip cards, and that says "Stop Forrest Stop," and when you want them to go, it says "Run Forrest Run." And then they'll do like a Forrest Gump trivia, like in the middle of the restaurant, and it's really cool. And Forrest Gump's all over the TVs playing around, like on the loop, and so.
That is so funny. To answer the other part of that question, I have to say, and we don't have time to get into a whole discussion on this, but I'd say probably my favorite movie of all time for a variety of reasons that we won't get into, but would be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 that released in 2014.
Yeah, the music is insane. I love the music.
Yes, the soundtrack. Yeah, Volume 1, greatest hit. Yeah, that's a good one. It's a good one.
Do you have a favorite show and a 90s show?
Oh, geez. Well, let me think. 90. I'm trying to think what shows were in the 90s that.
TGIF, man.
Yeah, well, it's so funny because it's like I felt like. Well, let me say that I felt like in general, it was really hard to like kind of be a fan of a TV show to where you would watch like a whole season. It was very difficult to watch a whole season back then because you would have to like go and buy the VHS tapes for like $100. It's like I didn't have that kind of money.
Yeah.
You know, so it was really different. Like so, it was kind of like just when you were in front of the TV and it was like something special was going on. You kind of watched, the episode of whatever show it was, and you appreciated it for just being a one-off. So I would say because of that, I don't think I had a favorite show.
Yeah.
I did appreciate though. One interesting trivia question is I don't remember the show Roseanne, but the creators from that were from my alma mater, University of Evansville, Southern Indiana, Evansville, Indiana. But the house at the at the beginning that was in Evansville, Indiana. It was like a real house. Obviously, they didn't shoot there, but that was a real house.
The exterior, yeah.
It was the Roseanne house, they call it. And every so often it'll go on the market in Evansville. So that's a little trivia. So I'll throw that in there for 90s. As far as TV show current, I'm trying to think of what I have watched lately. Oh my goodness! Well, what are some of yours? And give me some inspiration here.
I got a lot. My Christian answer is The Chosen.
Okay.
Other shows that I like. Oh man. When it comes to comedy, I like Everybody Loves Raymond. I like The Office. I like anything Tim Allen does. I like Last Man Standing. I like his new show, Shifting Gears.
Okay, I will say that. Okay, you brought up a good point. For 9, I would say probably maybe Home Improvement.
There you go.
That would not be a bad choice for favorite 90s sitcom. That was again. I didn't watch the whole season of any of those shows, but I always got a laugh out of that show for sure. But yeah, no, I think you named some good ones there. I think The Office is always a safe one to say.
Sure.
Who does not love The Office?
It could be playing in the background just for noise.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I did. This is back years and years ago, but I did a concert and we wanted to do something kind of funny, and this was like right at the height of The Office. And my friend who was playing bass, like he had a recorder, give the little instrument at the beginning of the theme music, and I had my best piano player at the time was with me, so we performed live the theme music to The Office, and I think that was the hit of the night. Folks didn't care about any of the other songs, but they loved us doing the theme of The Office. So yeah, always a good one.
Do you have a favorite musical artist of all time?
Oh man. I guess the fact that I can't think of an answer would lean itself that I do not. And I think it's always, having been in music, because not only, I've been an artist at various times, a songwriter, I've done everything in the industry you could possibly think of, and worked in different genres. Did artist development, in mainstream even at different points in my life. So I've always been, I mean, since I was 9 years old, I was so close to everything. I started studying the music industry like literally when I was 19 years old. So it always was so close to me that, I don't think I appreciated it the same as what just a casual fan would be, where they can just kind of name who their favorite artist, would be. There's just so many. Just 'cause I think, I've always been a student of the industry and a student of, the arts, and I think that any one of the legends, there's something to learn from, and I appreciate that about all of them. I'll say that this is what I usually now, currently, if someone asks me a similar question, is I will tell them, I don't so much care as much about, well, obviously I prefer listening to things that honor God and glorify God at this stage in life, especially, but if something is done well, that means more to me than where it may fit genre-wise or who's doing it. It's just something that is, a song that's very well written or very well performed, very well produced. That is it. So that is all. I went around the block a couple times to say, no, I probably couldn't name a favorite artist, sadly.
Last one. Do you have a favorite podcast that you listen to?
Oh geez. I listen to a lot of sports, talk radio and podcasts. So, since some of those are kind of like cross between podcast and TV show, but I really like The Herd with Colin Cowherd, for any sports fans out there. Some different ones along those lines, because to me, sports is a fun, kind of break from, because I'm just in music and in ministry, literally 24/7.
Sure.
So that's kind of my escape, and I just kind of need to clear my mind. So I'll put on a sports podcast that kind of relaxes. So I'll say that. What about any that come to mind, or any that we should recommend to our viewership here?
Yeah, there's several that I listen to. And let's see. I like the Throwback podcast where they go through the TV shows from the 90s, actually.
Okay.
Those are fun. I like, there's one about history. I think it's called History That Doesn't Suck. I think that's what it's called. Yeah. And then Blurry Creatures. I don't know if you heard of that one before.
Yeah, I have heard of that. Yeah.
And then, there's several that I listen to that are good. And so, everyone's like, you need to listen to this podcast. I'll just put it on the list because there's so many out there.
Yeah, I found myself, I'm more, sports aside, because that is definitely kind of day to day because things are breaking and whatnot. But with a long form podcast that's going to have, a different guest on or whatnot, to me, it's more about, I might be searching a topic or interested in hearing from a guest.
Sure.
And because they're on whatever podcast, I'll tune into that, and maybe like if I enjoy that interview, I might, let me see who else has, been on this podcast. But as far as one that I like listen to, religiously,
right?
Yeah, there's really nothing.
Yeah, besides the Christian music guys, but that's all right.
Oh well, that's a given. And everyone else whose podcast I've been on to the last year, yes, I listen to all of them. And also, 90s Worship Podcast, pretty good podcast too, right, for anyone listening. But definitely this podcast, you guys are honestly doing a bang up job, and appreciate what you do. I really do.
Well, Chad, what do you guys have next, and how can our viewers and listeners keep up with you all?
Yeah, well, definitely the hard launch, which that's one part, the Docuseries episode 1 launching. We'll also have some, new music coming out soon. But I would say, definitely our website, 90sworshipnight.com, great place to start. I'm telling everybody, I'm shouting it from the rooftops, go subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is, at 90s Worship Night, after the YouTube URL that, everyone knows. Sure. Just so that, if you subscribe, you'll get the notification immediately of when, the first Docuseries episode goes live. It will be during the day on April 4th. So that is definitely the case, but I'm not going to tell anybody what time it is. So you just have to subscribe to know about that. Yeah, and I think just our website in general, we post all of our event dates. We definitely have some exciting events coming up. We're going to be, from coast to coast, and we're in talks with several churches about doing an event that, we haven't got a date firmly, nailed down, or an event title or whatever the case may be. So they're not up yet. So just know that, every week probably something's going to get added. But we'd love to connect with, anyone, whether it be, through coming to meet us at an event or connected with us on YouTube. Our email address is 90sworshipnight@gmail.com if you want to connect there. Social media, we try to stay consistent on, at least Facebook and Instagram, for anyone who wants to connect on those two platforms. But we love to hear from everyone. Love to hear, everyone's 90s worship story if they have one, or if they have any questions or whatever the case may be. We're doing this, obviously to honor God, and there's an evangelistic component, but we're doing it for the people. We really are. This is not, that's why I tell everybody, this is not my Docuseries, or this is not my company. This is for everyone. That is our mindset, and we just want to partner, and we just want to see folks honored who were legacies of the 90s, and we want to have an impact on the individuals who will appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, to wrap up, I'd like to see if you'd be willing to share something that God's been doing in your life recently that would help build our viewers and listeners' faith.
Oh, geez. There's a lot. So I've tried to think what might be the most relevant or helpful for this content. It's really, and you all might feel this way. Just you have a podcast, and you're definitely entrepreneurial with some of the things that I know publicly and privately that we've talked about. So I'll say, for anyone who's trying to do something with ministry, they felt led by God to take a leap of faith, and step out there and start a ministry or start a company. There's always going to be kind of a hovering stress or obligation, that's always weighing on your mind about that, whether that be, just, oh Lord, where's the finances the revenue gonna come to, so we could do X, Y, and Z, or, this is coming down to the wire, we've got deadlines to meet, whatever the case may be. Anyone who's, in a similar position may have that stress. And what I've learned over the course of, 4 years of doing this project is, during the most stressful times, that is when you need to, out of all times, carve out time to spend with the Lord in prayer and in worship, and just make sure that your faith is getting strengthened. And time again, when we felt our backs up against the wall with what we're doing with 90s Worship Night, in the 11th hour, God has come through with a miracle. It's happened several times. And I tell everybody, you think, well, after it's happened, 5-6 times, why is my face still, shaking, the next time that we're against the quarter? But I think that's human nature, and again, I think that's why it's so important to spend that daily time, just in prayer and in worship, staying in the Word, just making sure in all things that we're biblically solid, with our foundation, and, with our day-to-day of, how we operate in our, jobs or our ministries or our businesses. So that would be my encouragement to the listeners.
Well, Chad, thank you so much for chatting with me at 90sworshipnight.com. You can find all the details on there. And thank you for chatting with me. Appreciate it.
Well, it has been a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much. And look forward to giving y'all the updates from the launch. And I'm sure we'll talk again at some point in the future. So thank you again.